The stagecoach rattled into Bitter Creek, Wyoming Territory, on a scorching August afternoon in 1876, carrying a young woman whose life had already been decided for her by men she had never met. Catherine Winters pressed her gloved hand against the dusty window, watching the ramshackle buildings materialize through the heat shimmer, and wondered if she would have the courage to go through with what waited for her at the end of this journey. She was 22 years old, educated at a finishing school in Boston, and utterly penniless. Her father had gambled away the family fortune before drinking himself to death 6 months prior, leaving Catherine with debts she could never hope to repay, and a reputation that made finding suitable employment in polite society impossible. When the advertisement came through a matrimonial agency, offering marriage to a prosperous rancher in Wyoming Territory, Catherine had stared at the words until they blurred, knowing she had no real choice but to accept. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and Catherine gathered her carpetbag with trembling fingers. She had exchanged exactly 3 letters with Edgar Thornton, the man who would become her husband. He was 47 years old, owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, and required a wife to manage his household and provide him with heirs. The arrangement was business, nothing more, and Catherine had agreed to it because the alternative was destitution. She stepped down from the coach into the brutal afternoon heat, the sun beating mercilessly on her dark traveling dress. Dust swirled around her boots as she stood on the wooden boardwalk, searching the sparse crowd for a man who matched the description in the letters. Tall, graying hair, a commanding presence, Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited. "Miss Winters?" A voice came from behind her, and Catherine turned to find a middle-aged woman in a plain calico dress studying her with sharp eyes. "I am Mrs. Thornton's housekeeper, Della. Mr. Thornton sent me to fetch you. He is occupied with business matters." The disappointment that washed through Catherine surprised her. She had not expected warmth from this arrangement, yet somehow she had hoped her future husband might at least meet her stagecoach himself. She followed Della to a buckboard wagon, climbing up onto the hard wooden seat as the housekeeper loaded her single bag into the back. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," Della said as she snapped the reins, setting the horses into motion. "Mr. Thornton runs near about 3,000 head of cattle. It is a substantial operation." Catherine nodded, too overwhelmed by the stark landscape to form words. Boston had been all brick and cobblestone, crowded streets, and the smell of coal smoke. This territory was endless sky and sage-covered plains, mountains rising purple in the distance, and a silence so profound it made her ears ring. The Thornton Ranch house appeared on the horizon after 30 minutes of bone-rattling travel. It was a sprawling structure of rough-hewn timber and stone, larger than Catherine had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, corrals holding dozens of horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle scattered across the grassland like dark stones. Della pulled the wagon to a stop near the house, and a young man emerged from the barn, walking toward them with an easy, confident stride. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as he came closer. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were the color of whiskey in sunlight, and when he smiled at her, something shifted deep in her chest. "You must be Miss Winters," he said, his voice warm and slightly rough. He reached up to help her down from the wagon, and Catherine felt the strength in his hands as they circled her waist. "Welcome to the Thornton Ranch. I am Jesse McCade, the foreman here." Catherine's feet touched the ground, but Jesse's hands lingered a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Catherine saw something flicker in his expression before he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Mr. Thornton is expecting you in his study," Della said briskly, already heading toward the house with Catherine's bag. "Come along, Miss Winters." Catherine followed, casting one last glance over her shoulder at Jesse McCade, who stood watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Inside, the house was cool and dim, furnished with heavy dark furniture that spoke of wealth but not warmth. Della led her through a hallway lined with mounted animal heads and paintings of cattle, stopping before a closed door. "Wait here," Della instructed, then knocked twice before entering. Catherine stood in the hallway, her heart racing. Through the door, she could hear the murmur of voices, though she could not make out the words. When the door opened again, Della gestured her inside. Edgar Thornton sat behind a massive oak desk, and Catherine's first thought was that he looked older than 47. His hair was more white than gray, his face deeply lined and weathered by years of harsh sun and wind. His eyes were pale blue and cold as he studied her with the same expression one might use when evaluating livestock. "Miss Winters," he said, not rising from his chair, "you are younger than I expected." "I am 22, sir, as I stated in my letters," Catherine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. 22, Edgar repeated, nodding slowly. "Well, you appear healthy enough. Can you manage a household?" "Yes, sir. I was trained in all domestic arts." "Good. We will be married tomorrow morning. The circuit judge is due to arrive this evening. I have already made all the arrangements." Edgar shuffled some papers on his desk. "Della will show you to your room. You will take your meals with me beginning tomorrow after we are wed." "Tonight you will eat in the kitchen." Catherine stood frozen, stunned by the coldness of his manner. This was the man she would promise to love, honor, and obey. This was the man who would share her bed, father her children. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave, and she felt suddenly dizzy. "That will be all," Edgar said, returning his attention to the papers before him. Della touched Catherine's elbow, guiding her from the room. Catherine followed in a daze as the housekeeper led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of a long hallway. "This was to be your room for tonight," Della said, setting down the carpetbag. "Tomorrow, you will move to the mistress's chambers, adjacent to Mr. Thornton's." Catherine nodded mutely, and Della left her alone. She sank onto the narrow bed, staring at the rough plank walls, and felt tears burning in her eyes. What had she done? She had traded one prison for another, except this one came with a man who looked at her like property he had purchased, which she supposed was exactly what she was. A knock at the door startled her. Catherine wiped quickly at her eyes and called for whoever it was to enter. The door opened, and a young Mexican woman entered carrying a basin of water and clean towels. "For washing, miss," the woman said softly. "I am Rosa. I help Della with the house." "Thank you," Catherine managed. Rosa set down the basin, then hesitated. "Miss Winters, if you need anything, please ask. It can be lonely here, especially for a woman new to the territory." The kindness in her voice nearly undid Catherine completely. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Rosa slipped quietly from the room. Catherine washed her face and hands, then changed from her traveling dress into the one other decent gown she owned, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days. She unpacked her few belongings, trying to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into panic. When Rosa returned to summon her for supper, Catherine followed her down to the kitchen, grateful she would not have to face Edgar Thornton again quite yet. The kitchen was warm and smelled of roasting meat and fresh bread. Della was stirring something on the massive cast-iron stove, and Rosa gestured for Catherine to sit at the scarred wooden table. A moment later, the back door opened and Jesse McCade entered, removing his dusty hat. His eyes found Catherine immediately, and he smiled. "Miss Winters. I hope you are settling in." "As well as can be expected," Catherine replied, and Jesse's smile faded slightly at the sadness in her voice. He took a seat across from her as Della served plates of stew and thick slices of bread. Two other ranch hands joined them, weathered men who nodded politely to Catherine but focused primarily on their food. Jesse, however, kept glancing at her throughout the meal. "Have you come from far?" he asked after a while. "Boston," Catherine said. "Though it feels like another world entirely now." "It is another world," Jesse agreed. This territory is not easy, especially for someone accustomed to city life, but it has its own beauty if you give it a chance. Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine warmth in his whiskey-colored eyes. He was probably close to her own age, perhaps a year or two older, with strong hands calloused from work, and a face that was both rugged and somehow gentle at the same time. "Have you been with Mr. Thornton long?" she asked. 5 years, Jesse said. "I started as a regular hand, worked my way up to foreman. Edgar Thornton is a hard man, but he is fair when it comes to work." There was something in the way Jesse said Edgar's name, not quite criticism, but not quite respect either. Catherine wondered what he thought of this marriage arrangement, if he judged her for agreeing to marry a man she had never met for the security his wealth provided. After supper, Catherine excused herself and returned to her room. She stood at the window, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, cattle lowed, and she could hear the distant sound of men's voices, probably the ranch hands finishing the day's work. Tomorrow she would be a married woman. Tomorrow her life would belong to Edgar Thornton in every legal sense. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, to accept what could not be changed. She slept poorly that night, waking often to unfamiliar sounds. The howl of coyotes, the wind rattling the windows, the creak of the house settling. When dawn light finally crept through the curtains, Catherine rose and prepared herself for her wedding day. Rosa came to help her dress, bringing a simple bouquet of wildflowers that made Catherine's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had no wedding gown, only her best dress, a dark blue silk that had belonged to her mother. Rosa pinned up Catherine's dark hair and stepped back to study her work. "You look beautiful, miss," Rosa said softly. Catherine studied her reflection in the small mirror. She looked pale and frightened, her green eyes too large in her face. This was not how she had imagined her wedding day when she was a girl dreaming of romance and love. But those dreams belonged to a different Catherine, one who had not yet learned how cruel the world could be. Della came to fetch her at 10 o'clock. "The judge is here. It is time." Catherine followed her downstairs to the parlor, where Edgar Thornton stood beside a portly man in a dusty black suit. Jesse McCade was there as well, along with another ranch hand Catherine did not know. They would serve as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Judge Morrison read from a worn book, and Catherine repeated the vows in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. When it came time to sign the marriage certificate, Edgar handed her a pen, and Catherine reached for it with shaking hands. Her fingers trembled so badly she could barely hold the pen. All the fear and uncertainty she had been suppressing rose up, threatening to overwhelm her. She stared down at the paper, at the line where she was meant to sign away her freedom, her future, her very self, and her hand shook so violently she could not form the letters of her name. Then, gently, another hand covered hers. Catherine looked up to find Jesse McCade standing beside her, his warm fingers steadying her trembling ones. His eyes met hers, filled with understanding and compassion, and something else she did not dare name. "It is all right," he murmured, so softly only she could hear. "You are stronger than you know." With his hand supporting hers, Catherine managed to sign her name, Catherine Winters, for the last time. When she lifted the pen, Jesse's fingers lingered a moment before he stepped back, and Catherine felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. "Catherine Thornton," Judge Morrison announced. "Congratulations on your marriage." Edgar nodded, looking satisfied as if he had just completed a successful business transaction. He did not kiss his new bride or even smile at her. Instead, he turned to the judge and began discussing payment. Jesse caught Catherine's eye and gave her a small, sad smile that made her heart twist. Then he turned and left the parlor, the other ranch hand following him out, and Catherine was alone with her husband and the judge. That evening, Edgar informed Catherine that he would not be requiring her wifely duties immediately. "I am not a young man," he said bluntly over dinner. and I prefer to wait until you have become accustomed to your new situation. You will move into the mistress's chambers tonight, but I will not visit you there for at least a week." Catherine should have felt relieved, but instead she felt only a hollow numbness. She moved her belongings into the large bedroom adjacent to Edgar's, a room that was well appointed but cold, lacking any personal touch. That night she lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about Jesse McCade's hands steadying hers or the kindness in his eyes. The days that followed fell into a routine. Catherine rose early, took breakfast with Edgar in stiff silence, then spent her days learning to manage the household. Della showed her the accounts, the stores of food and supplies, the schedule for washing and cleaning. The work was not difficult, but the loneliness was crushing. Edgar was gone most days from dawn until dusk, riding out to oversee the ranch operations. When he was home, he spoke to Catherine only to issue instructions or criticisms. The house was not clean enough. The meal was too salty. She needed to learn to manage the servants more effectively. Catherine tried to please him, but it became clear that Edgar Thornton was a man incapable of being pleased. He had wanted a housekeeper and potential broodmare, not a wife. And Catherine was simply the woman unfortunate enough to fill that role. 3 weeks after the wedding, Catherine was in the kitchen garden, trying to coax vegetables from the stubborn soil, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see Jesse McCade riding in from the northern pasture, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted near the house, and Catherine watched as he led the animal toward the water trough. Something made her set down her basket and walk over to him. "Good afternoon, Mr. McCade," she said formally, aware that the other ranch hands might be watching. Jesse looked up and his face brightened. "Mrs. Thornton, it is good to see you. How are you settling in?" "Well enough," Catherine lied. Jesse studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw right through her pretense. "The territory can be harsh when you are not used to it," he said carefully. "If you ever need anything, or if you have questions about how things work out here, please do not hesitate to ask." "That is kind of you." "Not kind," Jesse said quietly. "Just human decency, which seems to be in short supply around here lately." Before Catherine could respond, Edgar's voice rang out from the porch. "Catherine, I require you inside." She flinched at his tone, then turned without another word to Jesse and hurried back to the house. Behind her, she heard Jesse curse softly under his breath. That evening, Edgar informed Catherine that she would begin sharing his bed the following week. He stated it as a fact, not a request, and Catherine nodded mutely, her stomach twisting with dread. She had known this moment would come, had known what marriage meant, but the reality of it was far worse than she had imagined. The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. Catherine went through the motions of her duties, but her mind was elsewhere, dreading the coming night. She found herself watching for glimpses of Jesse around the ranch, though she knew it was foolish and dangerous. He was kind to her, nothing more, and she was a married woman with no right to think about another man. But she did think about him. She thought about the way he had steadied her hands when she signed the marriage papers, the warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice. She thought about how different her life might have been if she had met someone like Jesse McCade, before desperation drove her to accept Edgar Thornton's proposal. On the day before Edgar planned to claim his husbandly rights, Catherine was in the barn collecting eggs when she heard someone enter behind her. She turned to find Jesse standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. "I apologize for disturbing you, but I needed to speak with you." "What is it?" Catherine asked, clutching the basket of eggs against her chest like a shield. Jesse stepped closer, and Catherine could see the conflict written across his face. "I know I have no right to say this, and I know it could cost me my position here, but I cannot stay silent any longer." He took a breath. "Edgar Thornton does not deserve you. The way he treats you, the way he speaks to you, it is not right. You deserve kindness and respect, not to be treated like property." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "I have no choice in the matter. I am his wife now." "I know," Jesse said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I am trying to respect that, truly I am. But watching him treat you with such coldness, knowing that you are trapped in this marriage, it eats at me. You deserve so much better than this life." "What I deserve is irrelevant," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I am here because I had nowhere else to go, no other options. This is my reality now, and I must make the best of it." Jesse stepped even closer, and Catherine could see the gold flecks in his whiskey-colored eyes. "Catherine," he said, using her given name for the first time. "If you ever need help, if you ever need anything at all, please come to me. I will do whatever I can." "You are a good man, Jesse McCade," Catherine whispered, "but there is nothing you can do to change my situation." "I know," he said again, and the pain in his voice was almost unbearable. "But I needed you to know that you are not alone here, even if it feels that way." Before Catherine could respond, they heard footsteps approaching the barn. Jesse stepped back quickly, his expression shifting to professional neutrality just as Della appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Thornton is asking for you," Della said, her sharp eyes moving between Catherine and Jesse with obvious suspicion. Catherine hurried from the barn, her heart pounding, but she carried Jesse's words with her like a precious secret. "You are not alone." That night, Catherine lay in her bed and thought about the next evening when Edgar would come to her. She thought about the life stretching before her, years of loneliness and cold duty. And she thought about Jesse McCade, the man who had shown her kindness in this harsh place, and wondered how she would survive loving someone she could never have. The following morning dawned clear and hot. Catherine went through her usual routine, but everything felt surreal, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Edgar left early to ride out to the southern pasture, where there had been reports of rustlers, and Catherine was grateful for his absence. She spent the day preparing the evening meal with Rosa's help, trying to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. But as the sun began to sink toward the mountains, her anxiety grew until she felt physically sick. She was in the kitchen when Della came rushing in, her face pale. "Mrs. Thornton, there has been an accident. Mr. Thornton's horse threw him out in the South Range. They are bringing him back now." Catherine hurried outside to find several ranch hands riding hard toward the house. Edgar slumped in the saddle of the lead horse, held upright by Jesse McCade, who rode behind him. They pulled to a stop near the porch, and Jesse dismounted carefully, easing Edgar down into the waiting arms of other hands. "Get him inside," Jesse ordered. "Someone ride for the doctor in town." They carried Edgar into the house and laid him on the parlor sofa. His face was gray with pain and his right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Catherine knelt beside him, unsure what to do. "Catherine," Edgar gasped, "my leg, I cannot feel my leg." The doctor arrived 3 hours later and Catherine waited in the hallway while he examined her husband. When he finally emerged, his expression was grave. "The leg is badly broken in multiple places," Dr. Hartley said. "I have said it as best I can, but Mr. Thornton will be bedridden for many weeks, possibly months. He will require constant care." "I will care for him," Catherine said immediately, because what else could she say for the next month? Catherine's days revolved around nursing Edgar. She brought him meals, helped him with his personal needs, changed his bandages, and administered the laudanum the doctor had left for pain. Edgar was a terrible patient, snappish and demanding, but Catherine performed her duties without complaint. Jesse took over full management of the ranch, reporting to Edgar each evening on the day's work. Catherine was always present during these meetings, helping Edgar sit up in bed, adjusting his pillows, bringing him water. She was acutely aware of Jesse's presence, of the way his eyes would find her when Edgar was not looking, full of concern and something deeper that made her breath catch. 6 weeks after the accident, Edgar attempted to stand with the help of crutches. The pain was so intense he collapsed back onto the bed, sweating and cursing. Dr. Hartley returned to examine him and delivered grim news. "The bones are not knitting properly," the doctor said. "Mr. Thornton, I must be honest with you. You may never walk normally again. Even with healing, you will likely require a cane for the rest of your life, and you will certainly not be able to ride or perform the physical labor of managing a ranch." Edgar's face went white, then red with rage. "That is unacceptable. I am sorry, but it is the reality of your situation," Dr. Hartley said firmly. "You must accept your limitations and adapt accordingly." After the doctor left, Edgar sank into a dark mood that lasted for days. He barely spoke to Catherine, barely ate, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Catherine worried for his mental state, but she did not know how to comfort a man who had never shown her anything but coldness. It was Jesse who finally broke through Edgar's despair. He came to the bedroom one evening and spoke to Edgar man to man. "The ranch is running smoothly," Jesse said. "The hands respect my authority and I have been managing things as you would, but I need to know your wishes for the long term. What do you want me to do?" Edgar stared at him for a long moment. "You have proven yourself capable, McCade, more capable than I gave you credit for. I want you to continue managing the day-to-day operations. I will handle the business side from here, the contracts and sales, but the physical work of the ranch is yours now." "I am honored by your trust," Jesse said. "Do not make me regret it," Edgar replied. After Jesse left, Edgar turned to Catherine. "I suppose you think less of me now," he said bitterly. "A crippled husband is not what you bargained for." Catherine was so surprised by his words that she answered honestly. "I think no less of you, Edgar. You were injured through no fault of your own. That does not diminish your worth as a person." Something shifted in Edgar's expression, a crack in his cold facade. "You are kinder than I deserve," he said quietly. "I have not been a good husband to you." "You gave me a home when I had none," Catherine replied. "That is not nothing." Edgar looked away, but not before Catherine saw something that might have been shame in his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Edgar slowly began to heal, both physically and in temperament. He was still not warm, would likely never be warm, but he was less harsh with Catherine, occasionally even thanking her for her care. He began handling the ranch accounts from his bed, poring over ledgers and writing correspondence to buyers in Cheyenne and further east. Catherine fell into a new routine, spending part of each day with Edgar and part managing the household. The threat of wifely duties had receded with Edgar's injury, and Catherine felt guilty for the relief that flooded her. She was nursing Edgar, caring for him with genuine concern for his well-being, but she did not love him and doubted she ever would. Her feelings for Jesse, however, only grew stronger. She saw him daily as he came to report to Edgar, and their conversations were always proper, always carefully neutral, but the awareness between them was palpable. Catherine lived for the moments when their eyes would meet, when Jesse would smile at her, when his hand would accidentally brush hers as he handed her something. She knew it was wrong. She was a married woman, and Jesse was her husband's employee. But her heart did not seem to care about propriety or duty. It wanted what it wanted, and it wanted Jesse McCade with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. 4 months after Edgar's accident, on a cold November morning, Jesse came to the house earlier than usual, his expression troubled. Catherine met him at the door, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "There is a storm coming," Jesse said. "A bad one from the look of the sky. We need to get the cattle to shelter and secure the outbuildings. I wanted to let you and Mr. Thornton know to prepare the house. This could be a blizzard." Catherine nodded, her stomach tightening with anxiety. She had never experienced a Wyoming blizzard, but she had heard the stories from Rosa and Della. Storms that lasted for days, burying the land in snow, isolating ranches completely. Jesse reached out and touched her arm just briefly. "Do not worry. We will make sure you are safe." His touch sent warmth through her, and Catherine had to resist the urge to grab his hand and hold it against her cheek. Instead, she simply nodded and watched him stride back toward the barn, already shouting orders to the hands. The storm hit that afternoon with terrifying ferocity. Wind screamed around the house, driving snow against the windows in blinding sheets. Catherine and Rosa worked to secure shutters and stuff rags under doors to keep out the cold. Edgar sat in his wheeled chair by the fire, watching grimly as the storm intensified. By nightfall, visibility was zero. Catherine stood at the window, peering out into the white darkness, and wondered where Jesse was, if he was safe and warm, or if he was still out there somewhere in the killing cold. "He will be fine," Edgar said from behind her, and Catherine turned, startled that he had read her thoughts. "McCade is smart and experienced. He knows how to survive a storm." Catherine felt her face heat with embarrassment. Had her feelings been so obvious? But Edgar's expression was not angry, just tired and perhaps a bit sad. The storm raged for 3 days. The house creaked and groaned under the assault of wind and snow, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Catherine, Rosa, and Della kept fires burning constantly, and they rationed food carefully, unsure how long they might be trapped inside. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind finally died. Catherine woke to eerie silence and rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal a transformed world. Snow blanketed everything in drifts that reached halfway up the first-floor windows. The sky was clear and painfully blue, and the sunlight on the snow was so bright it hurt to look at. "We need to dig out," Edgar said. "And we need to check on the hands, make sure everyone survived." Catherine pulled on every warm layer she owned and ventured out into the snow with Rosa. Della stayed inside with Edgar, keeping the fires going. It took Catherine and Rosa nearly an hour to shovel a path to the barn, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Catherine's heart was in her throat as she pulled open the barn door. Inside, she found most of the ranch hands huddled around a makeshift stove, wrapped in blankets. They looked exhausted and cold but alive. But Jesse was not among them. "Where is Mr. McCade?" Catherine asked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. One of the hands, a grizzled man named Tom, looked up. "He went out on the 2nd day to check on the line shack where we moved some of the cattle. He should have been back by now." Catherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What do you mean he should have been back? Where is he?" "The line shack is about 2 miles north," Tom said, looking worried now. "But in that storm, he might have gotten turned around, taken shelter somewhere else." "We have to go look for him," Catherine said immediately. "Mrs. Thornton, it is too dangerous," Tom protested. "The snow is too deep and there could be another storm." "I do not care about the danger." Catherine's voice rose, sharp with fear. "Jesse McCade is out there somewhere, possibly injured or freezing to death, and we are going to find him. Now saddle the horses." The hands exchanged glances, but something in Catherine's expression must have convinced them, because Tom nodded and began preparing the horses. Catherine rode out with Tom and 2 other hands, following the direction of the line shack. The going was painfully slow, the horses struggling through drifts that came up to their chests. Catherine scanned the endless white landscape desperately, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of where Jesse might be. They found the line shack deserted, the cattle huddled miserably in the attached shelter but alive. Jesse had been there, his tracks still faintly visible in the snow near the door, but he had left at some point during the storm, presumably heading back to the main ranch. "He must have gotten disoriented in the blizzard," Tom said grimly. "Could be anywhere between here and the ranch." They spread out, searching in a wide pattern, calling Jesse's name until their voices were hoarse. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, and Catherine felt desperation clawing at her throat. If Jesse had been out in the cold for 3 nights, his chances of survival were slim. It was nearly dark when Catherine spotted something dark against the snow in a shallow ravine. She urged her horse forward, her heart hammering, and saw that it was Jesse's horse standing over a huddled form on the ground. "Here," Catherine screamed. "He is here." She practically fell from her horse, scrambling through the snow to reach Jesse. He was lying curled on his side, covered in frost, his face blue with cold. Catherine pulled off her glove and pressed her fingers to his throat, nearly sobbing with relief when she felt a faint pulse. "He is alive. Help me get him on a horse." The hands hurried over, and together they managed to lift Jesse's frozen form and drape him across Tom's saddle. Catherine rode beside them, one hand on Jesse's back, as if she could keep him alive through sheer force of will. Back at the ranch, they carried Jesse into the house, and Catherine immediately took charge. "Bring him to the spare bedroom near the kitchen. We need warm water, blankets, and send someone for the doctor." "The doctor will not be able to get through in this snow for at least a day or two," Della said practically. "We will have to care for him ourselves." Catherine nodded, already stripping off Jesse's frozen outer layers. His skin was like ice, his fingers and toes white with frostbite. Rosa brought blankets and Catherine wrapped him carefully, then began rubbing his limbs gently to restore circulation. Edgar appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, balancing on his cane. "How is he?" "Alive, but barely," Catherine said, not looking up from her work. "He has frostbite on his extremities. I do not know if he will lose fingers or toes, and I do not know if he will wake up." Edgar nodded slowly. "Do whatever you can for him. Jesse McCade is a good man and this ranch needs him." Over the next 2 days, Catherine barely left Jesse's side. She kept him wrapped in warm blankets, fed him warm broth when he was semi-conscious enough to swallow, and monitored his frostbitten fingers and toes anxiously. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, color began to return to his skin. His breathing deepened and his temperature started to rise. On the 3rd day, Jesse's eyes finally opened. He stared up at the ceiling for a moment, disoriented, then his gaze found Catherine sitting in the chair beside his bed. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice rough and raw. "Jesse." Catherine grabbed his hand without thinking, pressing it between both of hers. "Thank God, we thought we had lost you. You came looking for me," Jesse said wonderingly. "Tom told me before I passed out, you organized the search party." "Of course I did," Catherine said fiercely. "Did you think I would let you freeze to death out there?" Something shifted in Jesse's expression, an emotion so raw and powerful that Catherine felt it like a physical force. "Catherine, you need to rest," Catherine said quickly, releasing his hand, suddenly aware of how improper this all was. "You nearly died. You need to regain your strength." Jesse looked like he wanted to say more, but he was clearly exhausted. His eyes drifted closed again, and Catherine sat back in her chair, her heart racing. Over the next week, Jesse recovered steadily. The doctor finally made it through the snow and declared that Jesse would keep all his fingers and toes, though he would have some scarring from the frostbite. Catherine continued to nurse him, bringing him meals and changing his bandages, and they fell into long conversations that ranged from the mundane to the deeply personal. Jesse told her about growing up in Texas, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, drifting north and west looking for work until he landed at the Thornton Ranch. Catherine told him about Boston, about her father's gambling addiction, about the slow degradation of their social standing and the desperate loneliness of her final months in the city. "I thought I had no choices," Catherine admitted one afternoon as she sat beside Jesse's bed, helping him with a difficult bit of knitting that Rosa had taught her. "I thought accepting Edgar's proposal was my only option to avoid destitution." "And now?" Jesse asked softly. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Now I realize I made a choice based on fear rather than faith. I was so afraid of being poor and alone that I traded my freedom for security. But the security is an illusion, and the cost has been higher than I imagined." "You are a survivor, Catherine," Jesse said. "You do what you must to endure. There is no shame in that." "Is that what you think I am doing?" Catherine asked, meeting his eyes. "Enduring? I hope you are doing more than that," Jesse said quietly. "I hope you are living." The tension between them was palpable, a living thing that filled the room with electricity. Catherine knew she should leave, should put distance between herself and this man who made her feel things she had no right to feel. But she could not seem to make herself move. "Jessie," she began, but whatever she was going to say was interrupted by Edgar calling for her from his room down the hall. Catherine rose quickly, grateful for the interruption and frustrated by it in equal measure. "I should go. Edgar needs me." "Of course," Jessie said, but his eyes held hers for a moment longer, full of unspoken words. By mid-December, Jessie was fully recovered and back to managing the ranch. The winter work was less intense than summer and fall, mostly consisting of feeding the cattle and maintaining equipment, but it still required organization and oversight. Jessie threw himself into his duties with fierce determination, and Catherine suspected he was trying to work off the same restless energy that plagued her. Edgar continued to improve as well, though it was clear he would never fully recover. He could walk with a cane for short distances, but he tired easily and suffered from chronic pain in his leg. He had become more contemplative since his injury, less harsh in his dealings with Catherine, though they still maintained a formal distance. One evening in early January, Edgar summoned Catherine to his study. She went with some trepidation, unsure what he might want. She found him sitting behind his desk, staring at a sheaf of papers. "Catherine, please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. Edgar was silent for a long moment, seemed to gather his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. "I have been doing some thinking since my accident, about my life, my choices, the way I have treated people." Catherine waited, not sure where this was going. "I married you for practical reasons," Edgar continued. "I needed a wife to manage my household and provide me with heirs. I did not consider what you might need, what you might want from this arrangement. I treated you like property, like an acquisition, and that was wrong." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, surprised by his words. "I am not a good man, Catherine," Edgar said quietly. "I have lived a hard life in a hard land, and it has made me cold and selfish. But my injury has given me time to reflect, and I have come to realize something. You deserve better than what I have given you. You deserve a husband who loves you, who values you, who makes you happy." "Edgar," Catherine began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. I have watched you these past months, the way you cared for me when you had no obligation to show me kindness. The way you searched for Jessie in the blizzard, risking your own life. The way you light up when he walks into a room, even though you try to hide it." Catherine felt her face flame with embarrassment and shame. "I have never been improper with Jessie, I swear to you." "I know," Edgar said. "You are a woman of honor, Catherine. You have not betrayed your vows, even though I have given you little reason to keep them. But I also know that you cannot control your heart, and your heart does not belong to me. It never has." Catherine could not speak, could not even look at Edgar. "I am 47 years old," Edgar continued. "I have no children, no close family. When I die, this ranch will have no heir. I have been thinking about what to do about that, and I have made a decision." He pushed the papers across the desk toward Catherine. "These are divorce papers. I am granting you your freedom." Catherine stared at the papers as if they might bite her. "What?" "I am setting you free," Edgar said. "You will receive a generous settlement, enough to live comfortably for many years. You can return to Boston if you wish, or go anywhere else you choose. You will no longer be bound to this marriage or to this ranch." "I do not understand," Catherine whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because you saved my life by caring for me after my accident," Edgar said simply. "And because you saved Jessia's life by searching for him in the storm. And because I am tired of being the villain in my own story. I want to do one good thing before I die, and this is it. I am giving you your freedom." Catherine looked down at the papers, her vision blurred with tears. Freedom. The word seemed impossible, too large to comprehend. After months of feeling trapped, resigned to a loveless marriage, suddenly she had a way out. "What about you?" she asked. "What will you do?" Edgar smiled slightly. "I will continue to run this ranch with Jessia's help. I will grow old alone, as I probably always would have. But I will know that I did the right thing in the end, and that is worth something." "You are a better man than you believe yourself to be," Catherine said softly. "Perhaps," Edgar replied, "or perhaps I am simply selfish enough to want to be remembered kindly by at least one person." "Sign the papers, Catherine. Take your freedom and use it well." Catherine picked up the pen with shaking hands, staring down at the signature line. This time, there was no fear in her trembling, only overwhelming emotion. She was about to sign away her married name to become Catherine Winters again, to reclaim the life and future that she had thought was lost forever. And then, once again, a warm hand covered hers, steadying her shaking fingers. Catherine looked up in shock to find Jesse standing beside her, his whiskey-colored eyes filled with tears. "Jesse, how did you—" "I asked him to come," Edgar said. "Sign the papers, Catherine." With Jesse's hand supporting hers, Catherine signed her name, Catherine Thornton, for the last time. When she set down the pen, Jesse's fingers tightened around hers, and she looked up to find him smiling at her with such joy and hope that it took her breath away. Edgar witnessed the signature, then folded the papers carefully. "I will file these with Judge Morrison when he returns to the territory next month. Until then, you may continue to live here in the house, Catherine, if you wish, or you may make other arrangements. The choice is yours." Catherine stood on trembling legs, still holding Jesse's hand. "Thank you, Edgar. Truly, I do not know what to say." "Say nothing," Edgar replied. "Just be happy. That will be thanks enough." Jesse tugged gently on Catherine's hand, and she followed him from the study, her heart pounding. He led her through the house and out onto the back porch, where they stood in the cold January night, their breath steaming in the air. "Did you know?" Catherine asked. "Did you know he was going to do this?" "He told me this morning," Jesse said. "Asked me if I had feelings for you." "I was honest with him. I told him that I have been in love with you since the day you arrived, and that every day since has been a special kind of torture, loving a woman I could never have." Catherine felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. "Jesse, I also told him that I would never act on those feelings while you were married," Jesse continued. "That I would rather die than dishonor you or betray his trust. But Catherine, now that you are going to be free, I need to know. Is there any chance that you might feel the same way about me?" Catherine laughed through her tears, a sound of pure joy. "Jesse McCade, I have been in love with you since the moment you steadied my hands when I signed the marriage papers. You were the only bright spot in my darkest days, the only person who made me believe I might survive this place. Of course I feel the same way." Jesse pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Catherine buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and something uniquely him. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other under the stars, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "I want to do this properly," Jesse said eventually, pulling back to look at her face. "I want to court you, Catherine. I want to take you on drives and bring you flowers and make you fall in love with this territory the way I have. And then, when enough time has passed that it is respectable, I want to ask you to marry me. For real this time, not out of desperation or necessity, but because we choose each other." "Yes," Catherine said simply. "Yes to all of it." Jesse cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I am not a wealthy man, Catherine. I cannot offer you the kind of life Edgar could have given you. But I can promise you that I will love you with everything I am, every single day for the rest of my life. That is the only wealth I want," Catherine whispered. Jesse leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Catherine rose on her toes to meet him. Their lips touched gently at first, tentative and sweet, and then with growing passion as months of suppressed longing finally found release. Catherine wound her arms around Jesse's neck, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle as they kissed under the Wyoming stars. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jesse set her down gently but kept his arms around her waist. "I feel like I am dreaming," he said. "Like I will wake up and discover none of this is real." "It is real," Catherine assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "We are real." The next few weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. The divorce papers had been signed but not yet filed, so Catherine was still technically married to Edgar. But everything had changed between them. Edgar treated her with a kindness and respect he had never shown before, and Catherine found herself actually enjoying his company at times. They took meals together and played chess in the evenings, and Edgar told her stories about the early days of the ranch, when Wyoming was even wilder than it was now. "I could have loved you, I think," Edgar said one evening as they sat by the fire. "If I were a different man, if I had not spent so many years building walls around my heart. You are a remarkable woman, Catherine." "You are a better man than you give yourself credit for," Catherine replied. "What you are doing, giving me my freedom that takes real strength and character." Edgar shook his head. "It takes only basic decency. The fact that it seems remarkable is a sad commentary on my behavior up until now." Catherine and Jesse were scrupulously proper during this time, never alone together where others might see, always maintaining a respectful distance in public. But they found ways to steal moments together. Jesse would come to report to Edgar and Catherine would be there, and their hands would brush as she poured coffee. Or Catherine would walk out to check on the chickens, and Jesse would happen to be passing by, and they would exchange a few precious words out of sight of the house. Judge Morrison returned to the territory in late February, and Edgar rode into town with the divorce papers. When he returned, he sought out Catherine in the garden, where she was beginning to prepare the soil for spring planting. "It is done," he said simply. "You are free." Catherine stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and felt the full weight of that freedom settle over her like a benediction. "Thank you, Edgar, for everything." "I have something else for you," Edgar said, handing her an envelope. "Your settlement. It is a bank draft for $5,000, enough to buy yourself a small house in town and live comfortably for years if you are careful." Catherine opened the envelope and stared at the draft, overwhelmed. "This is too much." "It is what you earned caring for a difficult old man for nearly 6 months," Edgar replied. "Take it with my blessing." That evening, Catherine moved her belongings out of the main house and into a small cabin at the edge of the ranch property that had previously been used for storage. Jesse and several of the hands helped her clean it out and make it habitable, bringing furniture from the attic and helping her set up a small stove. It was humble compared to the main house, but it was hers, and Catherine loved it immediately. True to his word, Jesse courted Catherine properly. On Sundays, his one day off from ranch work, he would drive her into Bitter Creek in a borrowed buggy, and they would walk down the single main street together, visiting the general store and the church. The townspeople whispered, of course, scandalized by how quickly Catherine had moved from Edgar's house and into Jesse's company. But Jesse ignored them, and eventually Catherine learned to do the same. Jesse brought her wildflowers from the prairie and showed her how to identify the different plants and animals that lived on the range. He taught her to ride properly, not side saddle like a lady but astride like a rancher, and they would spend hours riding through the hills, exploring the vast landscape that Catherine was beginning to understand and even love. In March, Jesse took her to see the first calves of spring being born, and Catherine watched in wonder as new life entered the world, all wobbly legs and determination. In April, they hiked up into the mountains to a meadow filled with alpine flowers, and Jesse kissed her surrounded by a sea of color while eagles soared overhead. Catherine had never been so happy. The harsh territory that had seemed so alien and frightening now revealed its beauty to her, and she saw it through Jesse's eyes. The endless sky, the purple mountains, the way the light changed throughout the day, painting the landscape in ever-shifting shades. She began to think of Wyoming not as exile but as home. In May, Jesse asked her to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of her cabin watching the sun set, and he got down on one knee and presented her with a simple gold band. "Catherine Winters," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You are the love of my life, the reason I wake up smiling every morning. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Yes, Catherine said, pulling him up and into her arms. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in June on a beautiful Saturday morning at the small church in Bitter Creek. Catherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, and Jesse wore a new black suit that he had ordered from Cheyenne. Rosa and Della were there, along with all the ranch hands and most of the townspeople. Even Edgar attended, standing in the back of the church, leaning on his cane. When it came time to sign the marriage papers, Catherine's hands were steady. She did not need anyone to support her this time, though Jesse stood close beside her, his presence a comfort and a joy. She signed her name clearly and firmly, Catherine McCade. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the night. Edgar toasted the newlyweds and wished them happiness, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. Later, when most of the guests had left, he pulled Jesse aside for a private word. "Take care of her," Edgar said. "She is a rare woman and you are a lucky man." "I know," Jesse replied. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." Edgar nodded, satisfied, and then surprised them both by pulling Jesse into a brief, awkward embrace. "Be happy, both of you. God knows this harsh country needs more happiness in it." Jesse and Catherine spent their first night as husband and wife in the cabin that had become Catherine's home. Jesse was gentle and patient, and Catherine discovered that the intimacy she had dreaded with Edgar was something entirely different with a man she loved. They lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked until dawn about their dreams for the future. "I want to buy a small piece of land," Jesse said. "Start my own ranch, just a few hundred acres to start. It will be hard work and we will not have much money at first, but it will be ours, built by our own hands." "I think that sounds perfect," Catherine replied. "And I want children, Jesse, lots of them. I want this cabin to be filled with laughter and noise and love." Jesse kissed her forehead. "Then that is what we will have." True to his word, Jesse purchased 80 acres of land about 3 miles from the Thornton Ranch that fall. Edgar helped him secure favorable terms from the bank and gave him a dozen head of cattle as a wedding present to start his herd. Jesse continued to work as foreman for Edgar while building his own ranch on the side, and Catherine managed their small household and began establishing a garden. The work was backbreaking, but Catherine had never felt more fulfilled. She cooked meals over their small stove and washed clothes in a wooden tub and learned to milk the cow Jesse had bought. Her hands, which had once been soft and decorative, became calloused and strong. She was tougher than she had ever imagined she could be, and she was proud of what she was building alongside her husband. In December, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Jesse one evening as they sat by the fire, and he whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "A baby," he kept saying, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born the following August on a hot afternoon, with Rosa and Della attending the birth. Catherine labored for 14 hours, but when she finally held her baby in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. He had a thatch of dark hair and Jesse's whiskey-colored eyes, and they named him Thomas, after Jesse's father. Jesse was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, walking the baby around the property and telling him about the ranch they would build together. Catherine watched them and felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. Edgar visited often to see the baby, and Catherine was touched by his obvious affection for Thomas. "He has your stubbornness," Edgar told her, watching as the infant fussed in his cradle. "That will serve him well in this territory." Over the next few years, their ranch slowly grew. Jesse was smart and hardworking, and their herd increased steadily. They added a second room to the cabin, then a third. Catherine gave birth to twin daughters when Thomas was 3 years old, 2 red-faced, squalling girls they named Emma and Sarah. Jesse built a larger barn and bought more cattle with the profits from their sales. The work was endless, but Catherine had never been happier. She loved her life, loved her husband, loved watching her children grow strong and wild in the Wyoming landscape. Thomas was fearless, always climbing things and getting into trouble. Emma was the serious one, always watching and thinking before she acted. Sarah was all joy and laughter, finding delight in everything. When the twins were 2 years old, Catherine gave birth again, this time to another boy they named Daniel. Jesse built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Catherine planted a larger garden to feed them all. The ranch was thriving now, nearly 500 acres with a herd of over 200 cattle. Edgar's health declined gradually over the years. The pain in his leg grew worse, and he developed a persistent cough that the doctor could not cure. He spent more and more time in his wheeled chair, managing the Thornton Ranch from his study. He seemed content, though, often saying that watching Jesse and Catherine's family grow gave him more joy than anything in his own life ever had. On a cold November evening in 1882, Edgar summoned Jesse and Catherine to his house. They came immediately, leaving the children with Rosa, and found Edgar in his study, looking frail and tired. "I do not have much time left," Edgar said without preamble. "The doctor says my lungs are failing. I will be lucky to see spring." "Edgar, no," Catherine protested, but he waved her to silence. "Do not mourn me. I have lived longer than I probably deserved, and I have made my peace with death, but I need to discuss my will with you both." He gestured to the papers on his desk. "I am leaving the Thornton Ranch to you, Jesse." Jesse stared at him in shock. "What? Edgar, I cannot. You can and you will," Edgar said firmly. "You have been running this ranch for years now, and you have done it better than I ever did. The hands respect you, the operation is profitable, and you have earned this. I have no living relatives, no one else to leave it to. The ranch should go to you." "Edgar, this is too much," Jesse said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is not enough," Edgar replied. "Not nearly enough to repay you for your friendship, your loyalty, and for loving Catherine the way she deserves to be loved. Take the ranch, Jesse. Combine it with your own land and build something great. Make this harsh country a little less harsh for your children and your grandchildren." Catherine was crying openly now, and she moved to Edgar's side, taking his hand. "Thank you. For everything, for my freedom, for your kindness, for being a better man than you believed you were capable of being." Edgar smiled, and for the first time Catherine saw real peace in his expression. "Thank you, Catherine, for teaching an old fool that it is never too late to do the right thing." Edgar Thornton died 3 weeks later, on a clear winter morning with snow falling gently outside his window. Jesse and Catherine were with him at the end, along with Della and Rosa. He slipped away quietly, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had spent his life building. After the will was executed, Jesse and Catherine found themselves the owners of one of the largest ranches in Wyoming territory. It was overwhelming at first, the responsibility of managing so much land and so many cattle, but Jesse had been training for this for years. He hired additional hands, promoted Tom to a foreman position, and threw himself into the work with his characteristic determination. Catherine managed the combined households, overseeing Della and Rosa, and 2 additional women they hired to help with cooking and cleaning. She handled the ranch accounts with the same careful attention Edgar had taught her, and she made sure their growing family never lacked for anything they needed. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in the spring of 1883. Their 5th, a boy named Edgar in honor of the man who had given them so much, arrived 2 years later. The house grew with the family, additions sprouting like mushrooms until it bore little resemblance to the small cabin where they had started. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranch work as much as his father did. Emma surprised them all by developing a passion for reading and learning, and Jessie sent away to Cheyenne for books to feed her hungry mind. Sarah was the social one, always organizing gatherings and parties, making friends with everyone she met. Daniel had a gift with horses, able to gentle even the wildest bronco with patience and kindness. Grace and young Edgar were still children, but they were already showing their own unique personalities. On a warm evening in June of 1890, Jesse and Catherine sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. They had been married for 14 years, and Catherine still felt the same flutter in her chest when Jesse smiled at her that she had felt that very first day when he helped her down from the wagon. "You ever regret it?" Jesse asked, reaching over to take her hand. Leaving Boston, coming to this harsh territory, all the struggles and hardships. Catherine looked at their joined hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of years of hard work. She looked out at the land that had once seemed so alien and frightening, and which she now loved with a fierce, protective devotion. She thought about their children, healthy and strong and full of life. And she looked at Jesse, the man who had steadied her shaking hands when she signed away her freedom, and who had ultimately given her a freedom far greater than she had ever imagined. "Not for a single moment," Catherine said. "This life, this land, this family, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I needed." Jesse raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Catherine McCade. I have loved you from the very beginning, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. "Always and forever." They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing and arguing and living, the sounds of a family full of love and life. The ranch stretched out around them, thousands of acres of land they had built together through years of sacrifice and determination. Catherine thought back to that terrified young woman who had arrived in Bitter Creek all those years ago, hands shaking as she signed marriage papers that would bind her to a stranger. She thought about how Jesse had steadied those trembling hands with his own, and how that simple gesture of kindness had changed the course of both their lives. She had been so afraid then, so certain that her life was over, that she was trading one form of captivity for another. But she had been wrong. She had not lost her freedom that day. She had simply taken the first step on a journey that would lead her to a love she had never dared to dream of, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined, and a happiness so profound it still took her breath away. Thomas came out onto the porch, now 18 years old and nearly as tall as his father, to tell them that Emma had cooked dinner and it was ready. Jesse stood and pulled Catherine to her feet, and she leaned into his solid warmth for a moment before they went inside to join their family. Later that night, after the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Catherine stood at the window of the bedroom she shared with Jesse, looking out at the moonlit landscape. Jesse came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how far we have come," Catherine replied. "About how different my life is from what I expected it would be, about how grateful I am for every twist and turn that led me to you." Jesse turned her around to face him, cupping her face in his hands. Even after all these years, after 5 children and countless struggles and triumphs, the look in his eyes still made her heart race. "I am the grateful one," he said. "You took a chance on this harsh territory, on a cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination. You built this life with me, worked beside me, loved me even when I was covered in dust and smelled like cattle." Catherine laughed softly. "You still smell like cattle most days." "And you still love me anyway," Jesse said, grinning. "I do," Catherine agreed. "I always will." Jesse kissed her then, deep and slow and full of the passion that had never faded between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jesse took her hand and led her to their bed. As Catherine lay in her husband's arms that night, listening to his steady breathing as he slept, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Edgar Thornton, who had given her freedom when he did not have to, who had chosen kindness over selfishness in his final years. She hoped he had found peace, wherever he was, and that he knew how much his sacrifice had meant. She thought about the frightened girl she had been, so desperate and alone, willing to marry a stranger to avoid poverty. That girl seemed like someone else entirely now, someone from a different lifetime. Catherine had discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. She had learned that she was capable of enduring hardship, of adapting to a harsh environment, of building something meaningful from nothing. But most of all, she had learned that love could transform everything. Jessia's love had given her the courage to become the woman she was meant to be. It had shown her that she was worthy of happiness, worthy of devotion, worthy of being cherished. And her love for him, for their children, for this wild land they called home, had filled her life with a richness that no amount of money or social standing could ever match. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost Rosa to pneumonia in 1892, and Della followed 2 years later. Catherine mourned them both deeply, grateful for their kindness during her darkest days. Tom, the ranch hand who had helped search for Jessie in the blizzard, became like a beloved uncle to their children, teaching the boys to rope and ride and regaling them all with exaggerated stories of the old days. Emma shocked them all by announcing at 16 that she wanted to attend college back east. Jessie was reluctant at first, worried about his daughter being so far away, but Catherine convinced him to let her go. Emma left for Wellesley College in Massachusetts in 1895, becoming the first person in the family to receive a higher education. She wrote long letters home describing her studies and her experiences, and Catherine treasured every word. Thomas took naturally to running the ranch, working alongside Jessie and learning the business from the ground up. When he was 21, he married a local girl named Margaret, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and they built a house on the northern edge of the property. Their first child, a boy they named Jesse after his grandfather, was born the following year, making Jessie and Catherine grandparents for the first time. Catherine held her grandson in her arms and felt the circle of life complete itself. She was 42 years old, still strong and healthy, with silver just beginning to thread through her dark hair. Jesse was 45, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his whiskey-colored eyes still bright with love and humor. They had built an empire together, but more importantly, they had built a family rooted in love and respect. Sarah married at 19 to a young lawyer from Cheyenne, and they settled in the territorial capital, where Sarah's social skills and natural charm made her a fixture in local society. She visited the ranch often, always bringing news and excitement with her. Daniel, true to his gift with horses, started a breeding program that became renowned throughout the territory, producing some of the finest cutting horses in the West. Grace grew into a talented artist, painting landscapes of the Wyoming territory that captured its harsh beauty perfectly. Young Edgar, showing an aptitude for business, took over managing the financial side of the ranch, freeing Jesse to focus on the day-to-day operations he loved. In 1901, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Jesse surprised Catherine with a trip to Yellowstone, which had become a national park. They spent a week exploring the geysers and hot springs, marveling at the natural wonders. It was the first time Catherine had been away from the ranch for more than a day or two in years, and she loved every moment of it. But she was also glad to return home. Wyoming was in her blood now, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She could not imagine living anywhere else, surrounded by anyone else. This was where she belonged, with Jesse by her side and their family spreading roots deep into the harsh soil. One evening, in the summer of 1905, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas and Margaret's 3 children ran wild with Daniel's 2 daughters, while Sarah's 4 children tried to maintain the sophisticated manners their mother insisted upon. Emma had returned from the East with her new husband, a professor of literature, and was pregnant with her first child. Grace had sold several paintings to a gallery in Denver and was glowing with success. Young Edgar, now 20, was courting a girl from town, and seemed likely to announce his engagement soon. Catherine stood on the porch, watching her children and grandchildren, and felt Jesse's arms slip around her waist from behind. "We did all right, did we not?" he murmured in her ear. "We did better than all right," Catherine replied, leaning back against him. "We built something beautiful, Jesse. Something that will last for generations. None of it would have been possible without you," Jesse said. "You are the heart of this family, Catherine. You are the heart of everything." Catherine turned in his arms to face him, seeing the silver in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes, the evidence of years of hard work and good living. He was 50 years old now, but to her, he was still the handsome young foreman who had steadied her shaking hands when she needed it most. "And you are my heart," she said simply. "You always have been." They stood together, holding each other as the sun set over their land and their family celebrated around them. Catherine thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, all the struggles and triumphs, the sorrows and joys. She thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off a stagecoach in Bitter Creek 30 years ago, desperate and alone, and the strong woman she had become. She thought about Edgar Thornton, who had freed her from a loveless marriage and given them the means to build their dreams. She thought about the harsh territory that had tested her and shaped her and ultimately claimed her as its own. And she thought about Jesse, her beloved Jesse, who had shown her what love really meant, who had given her a life beyond her wildest imaginings. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Catherine McCade knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of her journey, not even the darkest and most difficult parts. Because every moment, every choice, every struggle had led her here, to this perfect evening surrounded by the family she and Jesse had created, on the land they had built together. Her hands no longer shook when she signed important papers. She had found her strength, her purpose, her home. And through it all, Jesse had been beside her, steadying her when she faltered, celebrating with her when she succeeded, loving her through every season of their shared life. That night, after their children and grandchildren had departed or gone to bed in the various guest rooms, Jesse and Catherine walked out to the hilltop where Edgar Thornton was buried. His grave was marked with a simple stone that read, "Edgar Thornton, 1829 to 1882. A man who learned that kindness is never wasted." "Do you think he knows?" Catherine asked softly. "Does he know what his gift made possible?" "I think he knew before he died," Jesse replied. "I think that is why he looked so peaceful at the end. He had done something truly good and he knew it." They stood in silence for a few moments, paying their respects to the man who had changed both their lives. Then they walked back down the hill to their home, hand in hand, as they had been for 24 years and would be for all the years to come. Life continued its inevitable march forward. Catherine and Jesse grew older together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming more gnarled with age, but their love never dimming. They watched their children raise families of their own, watched their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, expanding to over 15,000 acres and becoming one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. In 1908, Catherine published a memoir of her early years in Wyoming, writing honestly about her arranged marriage to Edgar, his surprising kindness, and her love story with Jesse. The book was modestly successful and brought letters from women all over the country who had faced similar circumstances, who had married for security rather than love, who had felt trapped by their choices. Catherine answered every letter, offering encouragement and hope, reminding them that it was never too late to choose happiness. Jesse's health began to decline in 1910, his lungs damaged by years of dust and hard work. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, that he should rest and take it easy. Jesse ignored this advice, continuing to ride out to check on the cattle, continuing to work alongside his sons and grandsons, determined to live every day to its fullest. On a warm May morning in 1912, Jesse collapsed while working in the barn. Thomas and Daniel carried him into the house, and the doctor was summoned. Catherine sat beside Jesse's bed, holding his hand, while their children gathered around them. "I am not afraid," Jesse told Catherine, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a good life, a blessed life. I got to love you for 37 years. I got to see our children grow strong and our grandchildren flourish. I got to build something that will last long after I am gone." "What more could a man ask for? Stay with me," Catherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Jesse, I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Jesse said, reaching up to touch her face with his weathered hand. "I will always be with you, Catherine. In this land we loved, in the children we raised, in every sunset and every morning star, you carry me in your heart, as I have always carried you in mine." He died 3 days later, surrounded by his family, with Catherine's hand in his. She felt his last breath leave him, felt the moment his spirit departed, and a part of her soul went with him. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from all over Wyoming. Jesse had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him, and they came to pay their respects to a man who had embodied the best qualities of the Old West: honor, hard work, loyalty, and love for the land. They buried him on the hilltop next to Edgar Thornton, overlooking the ranch he had built and the territory he had loved. Catherine grieved deeply for the loss of her husband, her partner, her soulmate. The days without him seemed empty and colorless, but she was not alone. Her children surrounded her with love, and her grandchildren provided endless distraction and joy. And she could feel Jesse's presence everywhere she looked, in the land he had shaped with his own hands, in the legacy he had left behind. She continued to live at the ranch, taking long walks every day, visiting Jesse's grave to talk to him about the family and the ranch and everything that was happening. Emma moved back from the east with her family to be closer to her mother, taking over the management of the household. Catherine spent her days writing, working in her garden, and playing with her great-grandchildren, of whom there were now 7. On the 40th anniversary of the day she had arrived in Bitter Creek, Catherine made a pilgrimage into town. The territory had become a state 2 years earlier, and Bitter Creek had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and paved streets. But the old stagecoach stop was still there, now converted into a museum dedicated to Wyoming's pioneer days. Catherine stood on the spot where she had first stepped down from that stagecoach, young and frightened and desperate, with no idea what the future held. She remembered the heat and the dust and the crushing loneliness. She remembered meeting Jesse for the first time, the way he had smiled at her, the strength in his hands as he helped her down from the wagon. And she remembered how those same strong hands had steadied hers when she signed the marriage papers, giving her the courage to take the first step toward a future she could not yet imagine. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of that younger Jesse, to the man who had loved her so completely, who had given her 40 years of happiness beyond measure. "Thank you for steadying my hands. Thank you for steadying my heart. Thank you for showing me what love really means." Catherine lived for another 6 years, staying active and engaged with her family until the very end. On a spring morning in 1918, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, her children and grandchildren gathered around her. She was 84 years old and had lived to see Wyoming develop from a wild territory into a thriving state, had seen her family grow into a dynasty that would shape the region for generations to come. They buried her beside Jesse on the hilltop, and the stone they placed there read, "Catherine McCade, 1834 to 1918. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She came to this land afraid and alone, and she left it strong and surrounded by love." The ranch continued to prosper under the management of Thomas's children and grandchildren. Emma's memoir about growing up on a Wyoming ranch became a bestseller, introducing their family's story to readers across the nation. Daniel's breeding program produced champions that won prizes all over the country. Sarah's descendants became prominent in Wyoming politics and society. Grace's paintings hung in museums, preserving the wild beauty of the Old West for future generations. Young Edgar's business acumen ensured the ranch's financial stability for decades to come. And through it all, the story of Catherine and Jesse lived on, passed down through the generations. The story of a woman whose hands shook when she signed marriage papers to a man she did not love, and the cowboy who steadied those trembling hands with his own, and then proceeded to spend the rest of his life steadying her heart. The story of a love that transformed two people and built a legacy that would endure for generations. On the hilltop where Catherine, Jesse, and Edgar lay buried, wildflowers grew thick and colorful every spring, as if the land itself was celebrating the love that had taken root there all those years ago. The current residents of the ranch, Catherine and Jesse's great-great-grandchildren, made sure the graves were always tended, the stones always clean, the story always remembered. Because it was a story worth remembering, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, even when our hands shake with fear and uncertainty, there are people who will reach out to steady us, to show us kindness, to love us when we most need it. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, that kindness and that love can transform our entire lives, turning desperation into hope, loneliness into belonging, and fear into a courage we never knew we possessed. Catherine's journey from desperate mail-order bride to beloved matriarch of a ranching dynasty was more than just one woman's story. It was the story of the American West itself, of people who came to a harsh land with little more than dreams and determination, who built lives and families and communities through sheer force of will and the strength they found in each other. And at the heart of it all was love. The kind of love that steadies shaking hands and trembling hearts, that endures through hardship and celebrates through joy, that grows stronger with each passing year rather than fading with time. The kind of love that builds legacies and changes lives and echoes through generations. The kind of love that began on a hot August day in 1876, when a frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach in Bitter Creek, Wyoming, and met a kind-eyed cowboy who would become her everything. The kind of love that was sealed when that same cowboy gently steadied her shaking hands as she signed marriage papers. A simple gesture of compassion that would alter the course of both their lives forever. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Catherine and Jesse left behind, greater than the ranch, greater than the wealth, greater than anything else they had built or accomplished. They left behind the legacy of a love story that proved even in the harshest circumstances, even when the future seems impossible to imagine, love can find a way. Love can transform us. Love can give us the courage to steady our own shaking hands and step forward into an unknown future with hope instead of fear. And that legacy, like the wildflowers that bloomed every spring on that Wyoming hilltop, would continue to flourish and spread and inspire for generations to come.